Welcome into the Tech Ed Podcast. I am your host, Matt Kirkner. As our audience knows, we are now streaming in 108 countries around the globe, and we bring thought leaders from all over the United States, all over North America, in many cases all over the world, to talk about great things happening in technical education, great things happening in education in general, in technology, in public policy, and so on. So we are a global podcast, but every so often I love to bring it home right back to my hometown, the city of Milwaukee, Southeast Wisconsin, and talk with people who are doing incredible things in our city. First of all, because it's a topic that interests me, and second of all, because I believe that the great things that are happening here can be a model in so many ways for other parts of the country. Today, we have an incredible subject matter expert, an incredible leader here in the city of Milwaukee and in the state of Wisconsin joining me. He's a longtime friend. Our guest and I have known each other for probably some 20 years or more, and somebody that I've had a tremendous opportunity to work with on a number of different projects. Always have an interest in listening to his insights. He's brilliant. He's experienced. He is Joel Brennan, and he is now the president of the Greater Milwaukee Committee. We're going to talk all about that organization, but let's start out with this. I mean, I've known the Greater Milwaukee Committee for a long time. I know about your work. I don't know if it's by design or not, but you don't necessarily have this like hugest profile. A lot of what you do, I'm guessing on purpose, is kind of quietly supporting incredible work here in the city of Milwaukee and Southeast Wisconsin. Just let our audience know a little bit about what your organization does.
Sure. We are at this point a 76-year-old organization, and I won't go back and tell the whole of that 76 years, but the origin story is important to kind of where it is today. It was founded by just a handful, maybe 6 or 8 community leaders in the late 1940s, and they were looking to elevate Milwaukee's stature nationally and internationally. Things like, we needed a downtown arena, we needed a baseball stadium that could attract Major League Baseball here. The zoo that had been at Washington Park was getting very long in the tooth, and they needed things like that. But also things like a regional medical center, arts, things like that. And over the course of the first 15 or 20 years, the membership within the organization really focused on those things, big capital projects, and it kind of changed the face of Milwaukee. And over time, now you speed forward to where we are at this point, it still is an organization and a membership that works on the biggest issues of the day, but now those issues are around public safety, around public education, around higher education, the city and the counties, the public sector's fiscal health. Those are the types of things now that we're focused on. We're a membership organization now. It started with a half dozen. Now we're about 200 members strong. So it's an organization that, we aren't out in the forefront all the time, but we are made up of a bunch of leaders in their own right who want and are committed to a better and stronger Milwaukee and southeastern Wisconsin.
And we're going to talk in a minute about your members and some of the really interesting folks that you have as part of your organization, because it really is a who's who, I should say, of leaders here in the city of Milwaukee and in Southeast Wisconsin. I have to mention, by the way, every time we drive by Washington Park as a family, I tell my kids that's where the old zoo is, to the point that it has become a family joke. Like, if we're driving in that area, the kids are like, yeah, isn't that the family zoo, Dad? So, or the former zoo, I should say.
We just drove by yesterday within the last few days, and my daughter says, hey, every time we pull off the freeway here, you tell us that there was.
That's awesome.
So she said, there should be a sign here. And apparently that sign is for people like you and me who know that for everyone.
I absolutely love it. But a perfect example, I think, of just so many of the different institutions here in our city of Milwaukee that your organization has had the opportunity to support. Am I right that you really let Milwaukee kind of play the leading role, and that you're there to kind of support it and not necessarily, put yourself on the stage for the work that you're doing?
I think it's in its best iterations over the course of 75 years. You have many different iterations you go through as an organization, but in its best form, I think what the GMC has been is, been behind the scenes, kind of pushing and working in cooperation with the public sector, with the city of Milwaukee, with Milwaukee County, with state government at various times, so taking the power of the private sector and then collaborating and partnering with the public sector in ways that can help move the community forward. And so it doesn't mean that we have to be out there front and center delivering programs and things like that. What we need to be doing is supporting those institutions, using the power of the membership and the collective authority that they bring to try to move the needle on different issues in the community.
with the people of Milwaukee and the community of Milwaukee being the beneficiaries of all that incredible work. And we're going to get into some of that work again in just a moment, but I promise to explore your membership a little bit. I mean, it's an incredible group of people, an incredible group of leaders, a diverse group of leaders. We'll talk about that as well. But my first question would be, how does somebody get to be a member of the Greater Milwaukee Committee?
Well, it's interesting. So just this morning, I had a meeting with the membership committee of the organization, and those are recognizable names for people who are in and around Milwaukee. And over time, it kind of works in a couple different directions. There are organizations, there are corporations that have been longstanding members, and as they get leaders that come up through the ranks there, or they change their CEO or somebody in the C-suite, they may hand the baton from one leader to another. So that's one way it happens. But where the organization has expanded over the years is it's not just the corporate sector, not just the private sector, it's the nonprofit sector, it's higher education. So all of the leaders of the higher education institutions in and around southeastern Wisconsin are members of the GMC, the heads of the largest nonprofits. And so, there's a whole bunch of different ways, but I think the effort is to try to bring together an array of talented leaders in the community that are cross-sector and can cooperate and coordinate in ways that can move us on lots of issues that are important to the community.
So a really great group of individuals doing terrific work. I know a lot of that work is advocacy and so on, and shedding light on certain issues and talking about certain solutions. But another part of it is putting actually financial capital to work in and around the city. Tell us a little bit about your funding model and how that operates.
Well, we're a relatively small nonprofit. We are funded almost exclusively through membership dues, and some of those members are the largest corporations in the community. So you've got Northwestern Mutual and Johnson Controls, and a whole host of companies and new ones, Milwaukee Tool. Some who have put their stamp on the community more recently. So those are the higher dues paying members, and then you have a number of, whether it's individuals or heads of nonprofits, or just people who are kind of the emerging leaders in the community. And so, making it not only cross-sector, but in some ways cross-generational, and making sure that you have all the right voices at the table is the way we do it. And in order to do that, we don't need a huge amount of overhead. In fact, the organization has changed pretty significantly in the last few years, and we've shrunk the staff in some ways because we're more focused on issues and less focused on program delivery. And so we don't need as much infrastructure to do that. The power really is in the membership, not in delivering programs, because there are plenty of other organizations in the Milwaukee community that are good at delivering programs. What we should be doing is making sure that they're well-funded, that they're running effectively and efficiently, and supporting those things.
One of the things we talk about in business strategy is focusing on your highest and best use. There's a lot of things that are probably worthwhile, a lot of things that are good ideas, but if we try to do everything, we end up doing nothing. And so this whole idea of focusing on those areas where you can have the most influence and maybe move the needle to the greatest degree, it sounds like that's how you're thinking about this. And then working through the power of networks and the power of the relationships and the reputations, if I may, of the individuals who are members, and just using that kind of leverage to do really, really good things. Let's move now to a topic, Joel, that is certainly top of mind for our listeners, because in as much as we're the Tech Ed podcast, we spend a lot of time talking about education, technical education, STEM education. Glad to see education is one of your areas of focus. For folks that may not know, the Milwaukee Public School system has its own set of challenges, externally and maybe sometimes internally as well. Tell us a little bit about how we're doing on education and how you're trying to influence the education world here in the city.
Well, I think clearly from the city of Milwaukee standpoint, we're not doing well. We're not doing well enough. In most measurements, we have one of the highest achievement gaps, the highest black-white achievement gaps in the country, and just in overall proficiency, we're not doing what we should. And that's not just in the Milwaukee Public Schools. We have three different systems. We have the private choice, where families get a voucher to go to those schools. A lot of them are religious schools. We have a significant group of charter schools, and about half the kids who go to the Milwaukee Public Schools. And while the Milwaukee Public Schools are marginally worse than those others, none of them are doing well enough, and the proficiency isn't where it needs to be for any of them. And so we take a role not only in the K-12 system, and in Milwaukee, K-12 has gotten most of the focus over the last 30 years because we've been, kind of the testing zone for a lot of the voucher and the school choice programs. But I think one of the areas of focus that we have really started to dive into is early childhood education, and at the other end of the spectrum, the higher ed system, because in both of those, when a kid shows up in K4 and they have had nothing to get them spurred on in those first 3 or 4 years of life, like you're already way behind, and that's what a lot of the people who you will talk to in any of those the education, whether it's public, private, charter, they will all tell you that the input that they're getting in there is just they have gotten very little brain development. And so, there's lots that we can do as a community and as a state around the early childhood space. There's other things that we can do in the higher education space. So what we're trying to do now, and we've always been engaged in the dialogue and the discussion around public education, but what we're trying to do is really organize employers and make the connection between these things and workforce. As well as anyone that workforce is the driving issue for virtually every employer in southeastern Wisconsin and probably anywhere else that you have. But the connection between making the real connection between that and early childhood education, because that's keeping people, especially women, out of the workforce. And there's a whole bunch of connections that you could make there. So whether it's around policy advocacy on those things, whether there are programs or opportunities that we can be creating or leveraging here. There's this unique opportunity of federal funding now that's out there. Like, how do you organize around those things? But this is one of the core issues. It'll be a determining issue for the community and for our state over the next 15 years.
There's no question about that. One of the most interesting statistics I've seen over the last several years is the correlation between a young person's reading ability in the third grade and the economic outcomes that result 15, 20, 30 years later. And it's just a direct correlation that if a student is reading significantly below grade level when they're about 9 years old, the odds of that student being successful economically, not that there aren't exceptions, but are incredibly, incredibly low. So this whole idea of, we need to make sure that our high schools are delivering quality learning, and our middle schools and so on. But if you don't fix that root cause, which might be academic performance when a student is first, second, third grade, just in the same sense that if we take material that isn't perfect and going into a manufacturing process, we're not going to get a good part on the other end. And the same is really true in so many ways for education.
Yeah, and you don't want to minimize children by making them about they're more than inputs. But if they when they show up in first grade, they're already 2 grade levels behind. How are they going to catch up by that all important third grade reading level? And so a lot of this is around early literacy, and we have good advocates, and there are some really good things that are happening in the community around this. And it's how do we marshal resources? How do we elevate these issues to a point where the investment on them, both from the public sector, but also philanthropy and all these partners come to the table and make sure that we can take our resources just as far as we can take them.
So let's talk about that in terms of specifics, because the truth is, and especially when it comes to STEM and technical talent, and we talk a lot about that here on the Tech Ed podcast, whether it's quality engineers, whether it's a good skilled workforce for our manufacturers and so on. That's a huge driver, both in the city and in surrounding areas in terms of future employment. I know for sure that you're hearing that from your members and others. But when we think about specifically in the whole education space, what are a few things that we should be doing more of that we're not doing now?
The most direct link between industry and education is in the higher ed space. And you and I were having a little discussion before we came on here about the Higher Education Regional Alliance, HERA, here in Wisconsin. And it's a great effort now, 6 or 7 years into it, where all the leaders of whether they're technical colleges, universities, all the heads of the higher ed are sitting around a table really on a monthly basis, talking about ways that they can better coordinate around access, around accomplishment and connection to business. Some things that they are doing specifically now. We just announced in the last week or so that there's about $1.5 million grant. It was an earmark that Senator Baldwin got in the federal legislation that allows them and affords them over the next year or so to create another 40 or so micro-credential programs where, business can have direct impact on what these look like. And ultimately, they can send some of their employees back for a couple of months to get this credential that is specific to what they need or specific to where they're going. I think the biggest issue around where we're going with workforce, and you're in tech and you know a lot about this, is things are changing so dramatically with AI and how that's going to change the workplace, that we have to do what Wayne Gretzky used to talk, skate to where the puck is going, not where it is right now. And so that's, I think, and again, I think the higher ed people would probably note this, but they are, it's very difficult for them to change. They have a model that they have used that's been successful for a long time, and they're trying to be nimble, and in some ways they're successful at that. But it is very hard to change that structure and change it towards what it has to be now versus where it has been.
Well, and I love the fact that you raised up this whole idea of micro-credentials. I don't know if you knew this or not, but I've been really, really involved with that whole micro-credential space through our work with the Smart Automation Certification Alliance. And the earmark that you referenced, we're actually, working really closely with a number of institutions, including Western Technical College in the western part of the state. And I just had a conversation this morning with the folks at Waukesha County Technical College, who, of course, Rich Brownhouse is part of Harrow along with you. And this whole idea of micro-credentials and this whole idea of saying, all right, as technology continues to change and the world of work continues to change, this paradigm that we get to graduate from high school or maybe do some post-secondary education, whether it's an associate degree, a certification, or a tech certificate, or a baccalaureate degree, and so on, this whole idea that we can just get through that pathway and then that's our education and we could go in the work. I mean, that isn't the way that works anymore, right? I mean, we're in the workforce. Now we got to come back and be reskilled. So this whole idea of micro-credentials is something that's really near and dear to my heart. I think it's the future of higher education.
Well, and it must be because, simply you and I talked about our own kids. I'm a consumer. My wife and I have two kids. They're going off to most likely going off to college this year and next.
Right.
But I just noted, for every year for the next 5 years, the number of people graduating from high school in the United States is going down. We're at this cliff, this demographic cliff. But I also saw, that I think across the U.S. we had one of the lowest birth rates for infants in the last year. Like, this isn't getting any better. The model that they know that 17 and 18-year-olds are going to go off and fill these campuses doesn't work anymore. Plus, that's not where the workplace is. The opportunity is, as you say, with people who are in the workforce who need more, and finding the way that they can monetize that, or they can make that for the higher education institutions to make that fiscally viable for them is important, but it's also hugely important for economic development and where we're going. Because ultimately, I still think that higher education is around problem solving. We need to be preparing people for careers, but ultimately we want them to be deep thinkers, critical thinkers, problem solvers, because there's plenty of those things that are out here that we need to solve.
Yeah, no question. And I would just point to, there's some great examples here in Southeast Wisconsin, especially in higher education. And I would point to Chancellor Mark Money from the University of Wisconsin-Milwaukee. Just some of the innovation that's happening. I think our technical colleges have long time been hungry for true transfer agreements, not credits to nowhere, but literally like 2+2 programs. Or now we have one at the University of Wisconsin Stout a little further away, where it's a true 3+1, where you only have to go to the university for 1 year to be able to get a baccalaureate degree. You can do the rest of your work at a technical college. And it's just been so much fun for me to see that paradigm around how we can shake up higher education. Are there other examples that you're seeing here in the city of Milwaukee of really forward-thinking actions at the higher education level, especially the four-year universities?
Well, I think you brought up Mark Money, the connection to the M-Cube program, where it's UWM, MATC, and the Milwaukee Public Schools, where they are really trying to knit those together so that there is a pathway. Half the kids who leave MPS go to either UWM or MATC, but there's a whole bunch of ways in which they're starting to do things where a senior in high school can be taking a dual credit program, or even getting a degree while they're still in high school and then moving on to the university. So like those kind of innovations are there. I think our challenge collectively is, how do we scale those in ways that it can be of huge value to the community? It's valuable for every individual that does that in terms of the workforce and the future of the community. Just need to make these things more viable at a larger scale.
Yeah, more viable and more efficient, right? So deliver the learning as efficiently as possible. Recognize that it's not necessarily how much time you spend in a classroom, it's what you can do and what you know and what you're able to understand as you're leaving that pathway. You talk about the importance of problem solving and kind of big picture thinking and so on. These are all really, really important. And so it's really creating some amazing pathways for folks. And I think looking to the future of education and workforce development, we're going to have a really, really interesting and enjoyable time here in the city of Milwaukee looking at, while it's not going to be easy, some of this disruption that is going to happen in education. Speaking of kind of a pathway, a journey, a career, you've had quite a pathway yourself. I think, Joel, you and I first met. It's got to be at least 20 years ago when you were with the redevelopment authority here in the city of Milwaukee. I was working on an economic development project actually in the near south side of Milwaukee, and I think that was the first time we connected. But since then you've been there. You've been you were the CEO of Discovery World for a long time. I think our listeners know you were part of the governor's administration as the Secretary of Administration for a number of years in the cabinet of Governor Tony Evers. Just such a really, really cool pathway that you've been on and a journey that you've been on. What would you say is the most interesting part of that journey, starting all the way back as a legislative assistant to then-time Congressman Tom Barrett to now you're running this amazing organization here in the city? Tell us about that.
Well, first of all, Matt, you've done a nice job of just outlining that I've had a hard time keeping a job for a long time. So you've got that. But I don't know that I have high regard for people who, when they get to be 18 or 19 years old, know exactly what their career path is going to be. And there are fewer and fewer of those. But for me, every step has been, in a lot of ways, determined by leaders who kind of helped bring me along. So I have a lifelong relationship connection to Tom Barrett. Part of the reason for that, a big reason, is I'm one of 11 kids. Tom dated one of my older sisters when they were in high school.
Small world being what it is, yeah.
And when he was running for office for the state assembly and the state senate, my grandmother, who lived in Sherman Park, was a constituent. And so I kind of cut my teeth doing that. And I, while I was in school at Marquette, had opportunity to do a summer internship in Washington, D.C., ultimately went to work for Tom when he was a newly elected member of Congress. So my career has been connected to him in lots of different ways. There were other people along the way, Gary Grunow, Mike Cudahy, who at various times either pushed me, gave me opportunities. And so that's the journey has in a lot of ways been around mentors who have said, and for not any particular reason, I'm not sure I had anything to give to them, but they said, hey, here's an opportunity for you, or you should do this, or, think about that. And I hope that that's part of what all of us, as you and I get to be, elder statesmen in this community, and I know you do some of this yourself, that's something that we owe the next generation.
No question. I tell people all the time, and a lot of times children of friends and so on, or they're afraid, they're they have some trepidation around reaching out and asking for help or whatever. They feel like they're putting you out or something like that. And I'm like, that is the one call that I will always take. I will take a half hour of my day for any young person who's trying to figure out what comes next. And I think that's a really good message for the younger people that listen to this podcast, which is, if you've got somebody that you look up to, if you have somebody that has a job or a career and you're like, I've always wanted to do something like that, reach out to them. I think, one of my favorite stories is that back when I was, I think it was in ninth grade. I think it was my freshman year of high school at Wauwatosa East High School. And my dream job at that time, interestingly enough, was to be a radio DJ. And we had to interview somebody who was in a position that we thought we would like someday. So I called, I don't know if you'll remember this name, but he was a DJ here in the city of Milwaukee, Tim the Rock and Roll Animal. And I reached out to Tim, and he literally took a half hour with me and talked about the job that he was in and what he liked about it, what he didn't like about it. Interesting now some 40 some years later, you and I are sitting here at a microphone.
You get the chance to do it now,
right?
Yeah.
Well, and it was all my experience at WMUR, which, as you know, is Marquette's university radio station, where I spent some time as well. But yeah, in a roundabout way. So good point and message to our younger listeners, which is reach out to that individual, reach out to somebody like a Joel Brennan. Incredible background, incredible experience. They're always willing to help. So let's talk now, Joel, a little bit more about the city of Milwaukee. We're in such a transitional period, transitional leadership, new ways of thinking about things, obviously tons and tons of change, demographically in the city of Milwaukee. I look back at my time, I don't know if I ever mentioned this, but I was the special assistant to Milwaukee County Executive David F. Schultz really, really early in my career, just as I was kind of coming through college and moving into what came next. And the city in so many ways is similar and the same, in some cases for better or for worse, because I think there's a lot of great things about the city that we've maintained, and in some ways we've got some problems that we should have fixed by now and haven't. But if you look over the next 10 years, what do you think is the greatest threat to our way of life here in metropolitan Milwaukee? And then also, what's our greatest opportunity?
Well, it's almost two sides of the same coin. The greatest threat is that we don't fix the flaws in our education system from the earliest point to to higher ed, and there are plenty, and things are changing so dramatically there. So I think the threat is that we continue to kind of live with and be satisfied with the general level of at best calling it mediocrity, especially in the K-12 system and in the early childhood space. There is a lot of excellence in higher education, but they are dealing with the fallout of the challenges that we have from the time people get to that area. And so I think that's the biggest threat, is that others get further ahead faster than we do in the change that's necessary there. And I was heartened to see the mayor in his inauguration just a few weeks ago, after he was elected for a full 4-year term, saying he wants to be more involved in K-12 education in Milwaukee. And not only K-12, I think he wants to be involved in the early learning as well. And I think even though he doesn't appoint the school superintendent, he doesn't really have any direct influence over the schools, he and the community they're the ones who are held responsible for that. And if he wants to grow the community and we want to be who we would aspire to be, it needs every hand involved in a productive way in that. And so part of that also is changing the nature of the conversation. We've had this 35-year battle between some people who feel like they're the defenders of the public education system and those who are the defenders of the choice and the charter. And we need to kind of get beyond those old arguments and get to how do we improve everything for everybody. The other side of that coin is, if we can get that right, I think there are huge advantages that we have that if we can do those things, we can be a place that can grow, that can flourish. We have the natural resources. We have the benefits of some of where we are on the globe that are going to help us moving forward, but we have to get these things right in order to do that.
I agree 100%. We have to do that, Joel. And one of the things that I think about as we converse about this whole idea of the future of the city of Milwaukee and the future of our education system, one of the things that I have a really strong question about is, do we fix it in terms of fundamentally changing MPS? I mean, do we fix it? We've heard arguments about maybe the state needs to come in and fundamentally change the system. Maybe the mayor, as you suggested, we've had conversations both now and when Mayor Barrett was mayor about whether we have to have somebody step in and actually break up that whole system. Do we try to fix it from the inside? And you don't have to answer that question if you don't want to. But as you were going through that, do you have an opinion on kind of some big fundamental shift that we could make here in the city of Milwaukee that would transform our education system?
I think, and I don't know if this is a fundamental shift or not, but I think not looking at things as separate, not looking at things as, okay, there are 53% of the kids who are in the Milwaukee public schools and 47% who are in private or charter schools. And oftentimes we will look at those two things separately. I think what we need to do is look at how do we enhance the outcomes for all of those kids, and not just pinpoint this one over here or that one over there. So our organization came out and said we could not be in favor of the MPS referendum, the one that passed a few weeks ago. But I also, I was in Keith Posley's office just earlier this week talking about, okay, where do we go from here? We weren't aligned on this. You have some additional resources. It's not going to fix everything that you have. There are fundamental changes that still need to happen. Where do we plug in and where do we fit with that? So I think that's the nature of where the conversation has to go. But there has to be a level of urgency around this that I think sometimes we lack here in this community.
For sure. And I really like the way you answered that question as I think about the different directions we can go. And we had, you mentioned the Metropolitan Milwaukee Association of Commerce. We had Tim Sheehy in here, probably, who's the former president. I would guess it was probably 4 or 5 months ago, having exactly the same conversation. And in that case, he and I partnered with others on a project that is putting industrial and advanced manufacturing education in a charter school, in a private school, and in two Milwaukee public schools. And really looking at, let's not argue about which of these has to be the solution for everybody. Let's talk about focusing on students, focusing on the city of Milwaukee, and figuring out what's best for both of those groups of people. And if we solve for that, it really doesn't matter how we get there. The question is that we have a plan and that we get there. And I think that way of thinking is exactly right. So shifting from education to just the city of Milwaukee, I asked what we should be doing more of in education. What should we be doing more of just Milwaukee in general? What would you love to see more of out of the people of the city of Milwaukee?
I don't want us to lose our Midwest nice, but we ought to be able to crow a little bit more about who we are. I think you and I would probably qualify as people who grew up here, love this, are advocates for us, no matter where we are, probably pretty zealously. And now, and I think every mayor does this, but I think this one has almost elevated our game. And we see that in drawing things like these national conventions, what we're able to do in expanding the convention center. But I think we've got to be less of the unknown out there and do a better job of telling our story and crowing about it a little bit. You said we could put either a bumper sticker on our license plate. It could say, "I had no idea," because that's what people, say when they come here. But we want to make sure that appropriately so, and we'll never lose our Midwest nice ability to do this. But doing that, I think, would be of great value to us.
Absolutely. We can be both nice and classy and be proud and loud about the great things that are going on here in the city of Milwaukee. I agree 100%. Let's now turn to something a little bit more fun, a little bit more interesting. I almost think or feel like the theme of this podcast is going to be I had no idea, right? I had no idea about Joel Brennan, had no idea. I certainly did, but maybe our audience didn't know all the amazing things that the Greater Milwaukee Committee is doing. People come to our city and say, I have no idea. I had no idea how amazing this place is. So you entertain a lot of visitors to the city. For our listeners around the globe and around the United States and around North America, what's something that would surprise them about the city of Milwaukee if they came and visited us?
I think Milwaukee being such a water-driven place, and it's not just the lakefront. My wife and I, our family lives just a few blocks away from the Milwaukee River. Like what we have done to recapture and reimagine our relationship to the water's edge, both at the lakefront, but also the residential components that have kind of rebuilt and reimagined the community. What we've done along the Menominee River in the Menominee River Valley of recreating what was a space that you wouldn't have even been able to get to 20 years ago. Like those are the things I think, and the ingenuity that goes along with that. That's a Milwaukee tradition. That's something that I think the entrepreneurs that helped build this community were part of. And so seeing that and living it and understanding that we're all drawn there is something that visitors, I think, appreciate. Now, you also have the nightlife and the restaurants and all the vibrancy of a truly global place. But I think that part of the unique fabric of that is it's knitted together through water more than anything else.
Absolutely. Going all the way back to the inception of the city and the fact that we do have these three rivers that kind of converge right at the mouth of where those rivers enter Lake Michigan. Speaking of Lake Michigan, I've had so many people come. I mean, lots of people, and they're like, I didn't know Milwaukee was on the ocean. It's like, no, we're not on the ocean. It's just a really, really big lake. It's 80 miles across and you can't see the other side.
Yeah, you may have had a friend or two who came to town saying, I'm going to just take a little run around the lake.
Right,
it's not going to happen. You got all summer?
Yeah, exactly. And it's just, but it really does have that vibe of, in some ways, if you're on the beach or you're on the lakefront, of having kind of that ocean feel to it as well. So many great reasons to come. A huge encouragement to come and visit us here in the city of Milwaukee, where you and I have made our home for a long, long time. And we're going to kind of turn the clock back a little bit with our final question for Joel Brennan. And that's this, Joel, if you were able to go back to, all the way before the Greater Milwaukee Committee, before the governor's office, before the, Discovery World and the Redevelopment Authority, and going back even to before when you were working for Tom Barrett in the U.S. Congress, if there was one piece of advice you could go back and give that 15-year-old Joel Brennan, what would that piece of advice be?
Okay, the first one is learn how to hit a curveball, and then you can, maybe your sporting career will last a little longer than it did. I guess if I have to think about that, it would be that what happens. You took me back all that time, but what happens in the next 35 years will have a huge impact on that next generation of 15-year-olds. Like I am, when you get to be 50, you're probably, you 15-year-old Joel, you're probably going to have a 15-year-old. And I did, my kids are that age. And that there is a responsibility that we have. I actually think, in some ways locally, but globally, we have not delivered on our promise to those kids who are turning 15 now. Like we have a responsibility of what we leave behind, that there's opportunity for them. And I think in some ways, the way that we fight instead of, fight each other instead of fight for things, like that's not helping them and that's not giving them. So like that would be the advice to me. Take that responsibility very seriously, because at one point there are going to be pieces of you, kids who you love, who are going to have to go out and do the next thing. And you might be making it harder for them, and you should be making it easier for them.
Well, if it's any vindication, I'll just say that there are a few people here in the city of Milwaukee, around the state of Wisconsin, or in the United States for that matter, who have had a greater impact on that next generation than has Joel Brennan through all the incredible work that you've done. And I could go almost roll by roll and talk about how the work you've done has had a huge impact on our city, the future of Milwaukee. So I need to thank you for all of that work. I need to thank you for taking some time here on the Tech Ed Podcast to share the great things you're doing at the Greater Milwaukee Committee. Joel Brennan, president of the GMC, has been my guest. Joel, really appreciate you coming on.
Thanks for having me, Matt.
What a phenomenal conversation we had today with Joel Brennan. As you can tell, I love the city of Milwaukee. I love my home state of Wisconsin. I love the great things that are happening here, and I'm always proud to share those things with the listeners of the Tech Ed Podcast. Come visit us in Milwaukee. Before you do that, you're going to want to check out the show notes for this episode. We had a lot of great conversations about policy and about different endeavors that are taking place here in the city of Milwaukee with Joel Brennan. So please check out the show notes. We have the best show notes in the business. You can find those at techedpodcast.com/Brennan. That's techedpodcast.com/BRENNAN. And also, always remember to check us out on social. We are all over social media, LinkedIn, Instagram, Facebook, you name it. If there's a platform, we're on it. Check us out. Like the work that we're doing. Drop us a line and let us know that you're listening. Thank you so much for joining us for this episode of the Tech Ed Podcast, and we will see you next week.